Have you ever looked at your life and quietly wondered, how did I get so far away from myself? Not because everything is falling apart on the outside. Perhaps no one around you even knows how tired you are. You continue with your responsibilities. You answer messages. You smile when you are expected to smile. You keep moving through the ordinary rhythm of your days. And yet, somewhere beneath all of that movement, you sense that something within you has become distant, almost as if you have been living beside yourself rather than from yourself. Maybe you have tried to begin again many times. You told yourself that tomorrow would be different. You would think differently, feel differently, stop worrying, stop looking backward, stop allowing certain people to disturb your peace. But tomorrow arrived, and somehow yesterday came with it. The same memories entered the morning. The same fears sat beside you. The same conversations continued inside your mind, even though the people involved were nowhere near you. And perhaps this is where rebuilding your life truly begins, not by changing everything around you, but by becoming aware of what you continue to carry within you. There is a curious habit of the human mind. It can take something that happened years ago and make your body experience it as though it were happening now. Someone rejected you once, and today you are afraid of being rejected again. Someone betrayed your trust, and now a new relationship must somehow answer for an old wound. You made a mistake, perhaps one you deeply regret, and even though life has moved forward, a part of you still stands in that old moment asking, why did I do that? Why didn't I know better? The calendar moves on, but the mind sometimes refuses to move with it. And when this happens, you may believe that your life needs to be repaired when what you may actually need is to stop carrying an old version of yourself into every new moment. Consider how exhausting it is to wake each morning and unconsciously pick up yesterday before you begin today. You pick up the disappointment. You pick up the resentment. You pick up the fear of what might happen next. You pick up the need to prove yourself to someone who may no longer even be thinking about you. Then you wonder why life feels heavy. Perhaps the heaviness is not life itself. Perhaps it is what you are carrying through life. A tree does not enter spring, insisting on keeping every leaf from autumn. It releases what has completed its season. It does not call this failure. It does not stand ashamed before the empty branches. There is a quiet intelligence in nature that understands something the ego often resists. Release is not always loss. Sometimes release is how life makes room for life. You may have seasons within you that are asking for the same permission. There may be an old identity you have outgrown. There may be resentment that once made you feel protected but now only keeps you connected to the pain. There may be guilt that you have mistaken for responsibility. There may be fear that began as an attempt to keep yourself safe but has slowly become the walls of the very prison you wish to escape. And none of this makes you weak. It simply makes you human. The invitation is not to fight these things. Fighting yourself is another form of remaining trapped in yourself. The invitation is to notice them. Awareness has a quiet power because the moment you can observe a thought, you begin to recognize that you are more than the thought. The moment you can notice fear moving through you, there is already something within you that is not the fear. There is an awareness watching it. There is a silent presence beneath it. You might call that presence your true self. You might call it spirit, consciousness, or the presence of the source. The name matters less than the experience of remembering that beneath the noise of your history, there is something within you that has never been wounded in the way your story has been wounded. Imagine the sky during a storm. Dark clouds may cover everything you can see. Thunder may convince you that the entire world has become darkness. Yet above those clouds, the sky has not disappeared. The storm does not destroy the sky. It moves through it. Your fear may be a storm. Your guilt may be a storm. Your grief, your uncertainty, your anger, even your confusion may sometimes feel like storms. But perhaps they are not the sky. And perhaps rebuilding your life begins when you stop identifying yourself with every storm that has passed through you. This is especially difficult when another person has become part of your pain. You may replay what they said, what they did, what they failed to give you. You may imagine conversations in which you finally make them understand. You may wait for an apology because you believe their apology will unlock your peace. But what happens when your peace depends upon another person changing? Without realizing it, you have placed the key to your inner world in someone else's hands. Forgiveness, then, can become something very different from excusing what happened. It can become the gentle decision to take that key back. You are not saying that the wound did not matter. You are simply beginning to recognize that you no longer want yesterday's wound deciding the quality of today's consciousness. And sometimes the person you most need to release is yourself. You may look back at choices you made when you were frightened, lonely, inexperienced, desperate to be loved, or simply unaware. From where you stand today, you can see another path that you could not see then. The ego uses this new awareness to condemn the old self. Wisdom may invite you to do something else. It may invite you to understand the person you were then was living with the consciousness available to them at that moment. If you can see differently now, perhaps that is evidence that something within you has already grown. So you do not need to rebuild yourself through punishment. You can rebuild through compassion. You can begin by sitting quietly with the possibility that your past explains certain parts of your journey without having the authority to define the rest of it. There is a difference between remembering what happened and continuing to live from what happened. One is memory, the other is identity. An awakening may be the moment you begin separating the two. You are not being asked to erase your history. You are being invited to stop consulting it every time you want to know who you are. There is another place within you from which to live. It is quieter than fear. It does not shout like the ego. It does not need to win every argument, predict every outcome, or receive everyone's approval. It simply waits beneath the noise with remarkable patience. And when you become still enough to notice it, you may discover something surprising. The life you thought you had to rebuild from the outside may already be beginning to change from within. Not because you have forced anything, not because every problem has disappeared, but because you are no longer bringing the same consciousness to every problem. And that raises a deeper question, one that may change the way you understand everything that comes next. If you are not your fear, not your mistakes, not your resentment, not the roles you have played, and not the story you have repeated about yourself for years, then who is the one beneath all of it who has been quietly watching? Perhaps that is where your new life has been waiting all along. Once you begin to recognize that you are not the storm, another question naturally appears. What is it that keeps pulling you back into the storm? You may have experienced this many times. You understand something clearly in a peaceful moment. You tell yourself that you are ready to let go. You feel lighter for an afternoon, perhaps even for several days. Then someone says something that touches an old wound. A plan changes unexpectedly. A relationship becomes uncertain, or life simply refuses to unfold according to your expectations. Suddenly, the peace you thought you had found seems to disappear. But perhaps peace did not disappear. Perhaps something else became louder. The ego has many ways of speaking, and it rarely introduces itself by saying, "I am the ego." It may sound more reasonable than that. It may say, "You need to know what is going to happen." It may say, "They should have treated you differently." It may whisper, "Look at everyone else. They are moving forward, and you are falling behind." It may insist, "You cannot relax until this problem is solved." And because these thoughts often feel so personal, you may mistake them for truth. But awareness allows you to ask a different question. Is this thought bringing me closer to peace, or is it asking me to surrender my peace in exchange for the illusion of control? There is nothing wrong with planning. There is nothing wrong with caring about what happens in your life. The difficulty begins when your inner peace becomes dependent upon life obeying your plan. Think about how much energy can be spent trying to control what cannot truly be controlled. You want someone to understand you. You want a relationship to become what you hoped it would become. You want a loved one to make a different decision. You want the future to provide certainty before you are willing to trust it. And when life does not cooperate, the ego interprets uncertainty as danger. It begins creating stories. What if everything goes wrong? What if I lose this person? What if I never find what I am looking for? What if I have wasted too much time? What if it is too late to begin again? The mind can travel years into an imaginary future while your body remains seated in the present moment. Your heart races because of an event that has not happened. Your sleep is disturbed by conversations that have never taken place. You become exhausted from surviving possibilities created by thought. This is one of the subtle ways fear keeps an old life alive. Fear tells you that constant thinking will protect you. It suggests that if you analyze every possibility, anticipate every disappointment, and prepare for every loss, you will somehow become safe. Yet notice what happens. In trying to protect yourself from future suffering, you begin suffering now. There is a gentler possibility. You can allow uncertainty to exist without turning it into an enemy. Imagine standing beside a river. You cannot see where every drop of water will travel. You cannot organize the current according to your preferences. You can build your entire day around demanding that the river move differently, but the river will continue being a river. Life has something of this quality. There are moments when your wisdom asks you to act, and there are moments when your wisdom asks you to stop fighting the current. The ego often confuses surrender with weakness. It imagines that letting go means becoming passive, careless, or indifferent. But spiritual surrender can be something far more courageous. It can mean doing what is yours to do while releasing the demand that you control what belongs to life. You can speak honestly without controlling how someone receives your words. You can love someone without controlling whether they remain. You can make a thoughtful decision without controlling every consequence. You can begin again without knowing exactly where the new path will lead. And perhaps this is one of the most important ways you rebuild your life. You stop requiring certainty before allowing yourself to be peaceful. There is another habit of the ego that can quietly steal the present moment, and that is comparison. You may be having an ordinary day and feel relatively content until you look at someone else's life. Suddenly your own path appears inadequate. Someone seems happier. Someone seems more loved. Someone appears to have found their purpose while you are still searching. Someone your age seems to have reached a place you thought you would have reached by now. Within moments, gratitude becomes dissatisfaction. Nothing in your actual life changed. Only the thought through which you were looking at it changed. Comparison creates an imaginary timeline and then punishes you for not following it. By a certain age, you should have healed. By a certain age, you should know exactly who you are. By a certain age, your relationship should look a certain way. By now, you should have figured everything out. But where do these rules come from? A tree does not look across the forest and become ashamed because another tree blossomed first. One tree may be covered in flowers while another is still gathering strength beneath the surface. Nature does not interpret different seasons as personal failure. Perhaps your life also has seasons that cannot be measured against someone else's. Some seasons are visible, others are happening beneath the soil. There may be periods when nothing appears to be changing, yet something essential within you is learning to release an identity that no longer fits. You may be learning patience. You may be discovering that solitude is not abandonment. You may be learning how to hear your own inner voice after years of living according to the expectations of others. This kind of rebuilding does not always look impressive from the outside. Sometimes it looks like becoming quiet. Sometimes it looks like saying no without explaining yourself for 20 minutes. Sometimes it looks like walking away from an argument you once needed to win. Sometimes it looks like noticing the old urge to please everyone and choosing not to abandon yourself. People-pleasing can appear loving because it often wears the language of kindness. You want everyone to be comfortable. You do not want to disappoint anyone. You become skilled at reading the emotional temperature of a room and adjusting yourself accordingly. But somewhere along the way, you may stop asking what is true for you. You say yes while something inside you is saying no. You remain silent because honesty might create discomfort. You accept treatment that hurts because losing the relationship seems more frightening than losing your peace. Then resentment quietly grows. Not always because other people demanded too much, but sometimes because you repeatedly gave what you did not genuinely wish to give. Awareness does not ask you to become cold. It invites you to discover a love that includes you. There is a difference between kindness and self-abandonment. Love does not require you to disappear. When you begin rebuilding from your true self, you may notice how often your identity has depended upon being needed, approved of, admired, or understood. This can be uncomfortable to see because the ego builds its sense of worth from reflections. Tell me I am good. Tell me I matter. Tell me I made the right choice. Tell me you still love me. Tell me I am enough. There is nothing shameful about wanting connection. Human beings naturally long to be seen and loved, but suffering deepens when another person's opinion becomes the final authority on your worth. Imagine looking into a disturbed lake and trying to understand your face through the moving reflection. Every ripple changes what you see. If your identity depends upon the surface of other people's reactions, you will constantly adjust yourself to whatever reflection appears. One person approves of you, and you feel valuable. Another criticizes you, and suddenly you question everything. Someone responds warmly, and you feel secure. Someone becomes distant, and you wonder what is wrong with you. But your true self is not created by these reflections. It existed before anyone praised you. It remains when someone misunderstands you. It is present even when you disappoint someone. The work is not to convince everyone to see your value. It is to stop forgetting it whenever they do not. This is where awareness becomes more than an idea. Suppose someone speaks to you in a way that immediately awakens anger. Your old pattern may be to react, defend, attack, withdraw, or spend the next several hours rehearsing what you should have said. But imagine that for one moment, you notice what is happening. You feel the tightening in your body. You hear the thought forming. You recognize the familiar wound. And before becoming the reaction, you simply observe it. That small space can change everything. Not because anger is wrong. Anger may contain important information, but you no longer have to become whatever emotion arrives. You can say inwardly, something in me has been touched. That is different from saying, this person has destroyed my peace. The first statement returns awareness to you. The second gives your inner world away. This does not mean tolerating harmful behavior. Peace is not the absence of boundaries. Sometimes peace leads you to remain. Sometimes peace leads you to leave. Sometimes love speaks gently, and sometimes love closes a door. The difference is the consciousness from which the choice is made. Fear says, I must hurt you because you hurt me. Awareness says, I can recognize what happened without becoming what happened. That distinction is part of waking up. You may also discover that some of the battles you have been fighting are not with people at all. They are with reality. You wanted something to happen, and it did not happen. You wanted something to last, and it ended. You wanted someone to stay, and they left. You expected your life to look different by now. There is real grief in these experiences. Acceptance does not ask you to pretend otherwise. You are allowed to feel sadness. You are allowed to mourn what mattered to you. But suffering often gains another layer when grief becomes resistance. This should not have happened. My life was not supposed to go this way. I cannot be okay unless I get back what I lost. The mind argues with an event that has already occurred. And no matter how convincing the argument becomes, the past does not return to the courtroom to defend itself. Acceptance is not saying, I wanted this. It is saying, this is what is here now, and I do not want to spend the rest of my life fighting the fact that it happened. There is tremendous energy hidden inside resistance. When you stop using that energy to fight yesterday, it becomes available for presence. And presence is where your new life actually exists. Not next year. Not when everyone understands you. Not after every wound has completely disappeared. Here, this moment, you may notice your breathing as you hear these words. You may become aware of the room around you for a few seconds. There may be nothing to solve. That is not avoidance. That is reality before thought adds its commentary. The ego may immediately return and say, yes, but what about tomorrow? Tomorrow will arrive as another present moment. Your life is always meeting you here. This is why rebuilding cannot happen entirely through thought. You can think about peace endlessly without experiencing it. You can read about letting go while holding tightly to every grievance. You can understand forgiveness intellectually while continuing to revisit the wound each night. At some point, awareness becomes practice. You notice, you soften, you release a little, then perhaps you hold on again. And you notice again, there is no need to turn spiritual growth into another reason to criticize yourself. The ego is quite capable of turning even awakening into a competition. I should be more peaceful by now. I should not still be angry. I thought I had healed this. Be careful with that voice. Healing is rarely a straight line. An old emotion returning does not necessarily mean you have gone backward. Sometimes it returns because you are finally able to meet it with a different level of awareness. Imagine cleaning a garden after a long winter. When you begin turning the soil, things buried beneath the surface appear. Roots, stones, dead leaves. Their appearance does not mean the garden is becoming worse. They were already there. Awareness brings hidden things into the light, and what comes into the light can finally be met consciously. This may be happening in your life right now. Perhaps you thought you were falling apart when you were actually becoming unable to continue pretending. Perhaps the anxiety is revealing how much of your life has been organized around control. Perhaps the exhaustion is showing you how long you have been trying to earn love. Perhaps the resentment is revealing where you abandon your own boundaries. Perhaps the loneliness is asking whether you know how to be present with yourself without immediately searching for someone to complete the silence. You do not need to judge these discoveries. You can become curious about them. Curiosity is softer than condemnation. Instead of asking, what is wrong with me? You might ask, what is this feeling trying to show me? Instead of asking, why can't I get over the past? You might ask, what am I still believing about myself because of the past? Perhaps you are still believing that because someone left, you were unworthy of love. Because you failed, you are a failure. Because you lost time, it is too late. Because someone betrayed you, no one can be trusted. Because you once abandoned yourself, you cannot find your way home. These are not merely memories, they are conclusions. And conclusions can become invisible walls. Awareness allows you to see the wall. Love allows you to question whether it still needs to be there. You may discover that the deepest rebuilding is not about adding something new to yourself, it is about removing what obscures what was already there. Imagine a window covered with years of dust. You do not create the sunlight by cleaning the glass. The light was always there. You simply remove what prevented you from seeing it clearly. Fear can be dust. Resentment can be dust. Shame can be dust. The need for approval can be dust. The belief that your past defines you can be dust. And awareness begins wiping the window gently, one layer at a time. There is no need to attack the dust. There is no need to hate yourself for allowing it to gather. You simply begin seeing more clearly. And the clearer you see, the less interested you become in fighting every thought that appears. You learn that thoughts can pass through consciousness like birds crossing an open sky. You do not need to chase each one. You do not need to build a home for each one. A fearful thought can appear without becoming your future. A memory can appear without becoming your identity. An emotion can rise without becoming your master. This is freedom beginning quietly. And perhaps now you can see why rebuilding your life cannot simply mean becoming a more successful version of the person fear created. If you rebuild from fear, you may create different circumstances while carrying the same inner prison. If you rebuild from resentment, the past remains the architect. If you rebuild because you need to prove your worth, every new achievement will still be asking the same old question, am I enough now? But what if you begin somewhere else? What if you rebuild from the understanding that there is nothing essential within you that needs to prove its right to exist? What if the foundation is peace? What if the foundation is love? What if the foundation is your willingness to live in relationship with something deeper than the anxious voice of the ego? You may call that deeper presence God. You may call it source. You may simply experience it as the quiet intelligence of life. Whatever language feels natural to you, there are moments when you can sense it. You feel it when you stop arguing with the silence. You feel it when you forgive without needing the other person to understand. You feel it when you watch the evening sky and for a few seconds forget the story of who you think you must become. You feel it when gratitude appears without a reason. You feel it when you realize you are alive in this moment, breathing, aware, still capable of choosing love. These moments may seem small, but perhaps they are openings. Perhaps they are reminders that beneath the identity you have been defending, repairing, comparing, and judging, there is a deeper self that has never needed to compete with anyone. And once you begin touching that place, even briefly, another kind of rebuilding becomes possible. You stop asking life to give you peace and begin bringing peace to life. You stop asking everyone else to give you permission to be yourself. You stop waiting for the past to become different. You stop demanding that the future explain itself before you agree to enter it. And slowly, the energy that was tied up in resistance becomes available for something else. For forgiveness, for trust, for intention, for love, for the quiet courage to meet life without carrying every old identity into it. This is where the journey begins to deepen. Because seeing the ego is only part of awakening. Awareness opens the door, but eventually you are invited to walk through it. And on the other side of that door is not a new person you must struggle to become. It is the self beneath the struggle, the self beneath the fear, the self that does not need yesterday to disappear in order to be peaceful today. Perhaps the next stage of rebuilding your life is not asking, how do I create a new me? Perhaps it is asking something far gentler. What am I finally willing to release so that the person I have always been can come forward? There comes a moment in the rebuilding of your life when understanding is no longer enough. You may understand why you are afraid. You may recognize the patterns of the ego. You may see how comparison, control, resentment, and old identities have kept you connected to a past that no longer exists. And yet, even with all this understanding, there may still be something within you holding on. This is where the journey becomes quieter. Because letting go is not simply an idea you understand. It is something your heart gradually becomes willing to experience. And often, the first place you are invited to let go is forgiveness. There may be someone whose name still changes something inside you. Perhaps years have passed, but when you remember what happened, your body remembers too. The conversation returns. The betrayal returns. The moment you realize they were not who you believed them to be returns. You may have moved on physically, but emotionally, part of you is still standing in that old room waiting for something, waiting for an explanation, waiting for an apology, waiting for justice, waiting for them to finally understand what they did to you. There is nothing strange about this. When you have been hurt, the mind naturally tries to make sense of the wound. It returns to the event because it believes that if it thinks about it long enough, perhaps it can find the missing answer that will finally create peace. But sometimes there is no answer that satisfies the heart. Sometimes the apology never comes. Sometimes the person who hurt you does not understand. Sometimes they understand and still cannot give you what you hope to receive. And then life presents a difficult but beautiful possibility. Can you become free without their participation? This is where forgiveness takes on a deeper meaning. Forgiveness does not have to mean that what happened was acceptable. It does not mean you invite someone back into your life when their presence is harmful. It does not mean you abandon discernment or pretend that a wound never existed. Forgiveness can simply mean that you are no longer willing to use your own consciousness as a place where the injury must continue happening. You release the person from the responsibility of creating your peace. And in doing so, you begin releasing yourself. Imagine carrying a heavy stone because someone once placed it in your hands. At first you carry it because you are shocked. Then you carry it because you are angry. Eventually you forget that your hands can open. Forgiveness is not pretending the stone was light. It is opening your hands. You may still remember its weight. You may still know exactly where it came from. But you no longer need to carry it into every place you go. And sometimes the heaviest stone has your own name written on it. There may be choices from your past that you find difficult to forgive. Perhaps you stayed too long. Perhaps you left too soon. Perhaps you trusted someone you now believe you should not have trusted. Perhaps you ignored your intuition. Perhaps you hurt someone. Perhaps fear caused you to make a decision that changed the direction of your life. The mind loves the phrase, "I should have known better." But consider this gently. If you truly had known better in the deepest sense, perhaps you would have chosen differently. Wisdom often arrives after the experience that teaches it. You are looking backward with awareness that was not fully available to you then. What would happen if, instead of putting your former self on trial, you sat beside that person? Imagine meeting the younger version of you who made that choice. Look at what they knew. Look at what they feared. Look at what they were trying to receive. Perhaps they wanted love. Perhaps they wanted safety. Perhaps they were trying to avoid loneliness. Perhaps they simply did not yet understand themselves. Would condemnation heal that person? Or would compassion? You may begin to see that self-forgiveness is not avoiding responsibility. In fact, genuine forgiveness can make responsibility clearer because you no longer need to defend yourself against shame. You can say, yes, I made that choice. Yes, it had consequences. And I am willing to learn without turning my entire existence into a punishment. There is a great difference between saying, I did something I regret, and saying, I am someone who deserves to live in regret. One describes an experience. The other creates an identity. And you are learning to release identities that no longer belong to your true nature. This is one of the quiet miracles of awareness. The past remains what it was, but your relationship to it can change. You cannot return to yesterday and rewrite the scene. But you can stop allowing yesterday to write today. And when forgiveness begins creating space within you, something else becomes possible: surrender. Surrender may be one of the most misunderstood spiritual ideas because the ego hears the word and imagines defeat. It imagines giving up, becoming powerless, or allowing life to happen without participation. But surrender does not have to mean withdrawing from life. It can mean withdrawing your argument with life. You still make choices. You still speak. You still create boundaries. You still care. But you stop insisting that peace can only exist when everything unfolds according to your expectations. There may be something in your life right now that you are trying very hard to force. Perhaps it is a relationship. Perhaps you want someone to choose you. Perhaps you are waiting for an answer about your future. Perhaps you believe you must discover your purpose immediately because uncertainty makes you uncomfortable. You may have spent months asking, how do I make this happen? But there is another question that can open a different door. What happens if I stop forcing this? Notice what you feel when you ask that. Fear may arise immediately. If I stop pushing, everything will fall apart. If I stop chasing, they will leave. If I stop worrying, I will become careless. If I stop controlling, something bad will happen. The ego often believes tension is what holds life together. But look at nature. A seed beneath the soil does not force itself open through anxiety. The tree does not spend the night worrying about whether morning will arrive. The ocean does not hold one wave because it fears there will never be another. There is movement, but there is also trust. Perhaps your life contains the same invitation. Trust does not mean believing that everything will happen exactly as you prefer. That is simply another form of control, wearing spiritual clothing. Trust may mean something deeper. It may mean knowing that whatever arrives, you can meet it from the presence within you. It may mean releasing your demand to understand every chapter before you are willing to live it. You may not know why a relationship ended. You may not know why one season of your life lasted longer than you expected. You may not know what comes next, and perhaps you do not need to know yet. Sometimes life is like walking through a landscape at dawn. You cannot see the entire road. The light reveals only what is immediately in front of you, but perhaps that is enough. The ego wants a map of the next 10 years. The soul may simply invite you to take the next honest step. This changes the meaning of intention. Intention is not forcing the universe to obey your wishes. It is not making demands of life and calling those demands spirituality. Intention can be the quiet inner decision about the energy you wish to bring into whatever happens. You can intend to meet this day with kindness. You can intend to become more aware when fear appears. You can intend to stop making your worth dependent upon approval. You can intend to bring peace into a difficult conversation. You can intend to listen before reacting. You can intend to choose love whenever you notice fear making the decision for you. Then intention becomes less about controlling circumstances and more about aligning consciousness. You may wake tomorrow and still have unanswered questions, but you can decide what kind of presence will meet those questions. This is a profound shift. Instead of asking, what will life give me today? You begin asking, what quality of consciousness will I bring to life today? Perhaps this is what it means to live in harmony with the source. You are not trying to bargain with some distant power. You are becoming available to the qualities you associate with the sacred: love, compassion, patience, creativity, peace, generosity, and understanding. You begin to recognize that these qualities are not rewards waiting somewhere outside you. They are possibilities already within you. Think about the moments when you have felt unexpectedly peaceful. Perhaps you were walking alone early in the morning. Perhaps you were sitting beside the ocean. Perhaps you were looking through a window while rain moved across the glass. Perhaps you were holding the hand of someone you loved. For a brief moment, you were not trying to become anything. You were simply there. And there was enoughness in that moment. The ego may later return and ask, how do I get that feeling back? But perhaps peace was present because for those few seconds, you stopped trying to get somewhere else. You were not negotiating with the moment. You were inside it. This is the home you are returning to. Not a geographical place, not a perfect future, a state of presence. And this presence begins changing how you relate to relationships. When you live primarily from fear, love can easily become attachment. You may say, I love you, while silently meaning, please do not leave me because I do not know who I am without you. You may call it devotion when you are actually abandoning yourself to preserve connection. You may try to control another person because their choices awaken your insecurity. But love and possession are not the same. Perhaps real love contains enough space for another person to be who they are while you remain connected to who you are. That does not mean every relationship continues. Sometimes returning to yourself reveals that a relationship has completed its season. This can be painful. There are people you may deeply love who cannot walk with you into every chapter of your life. A leaf can be beautiful and still fall from the tree. An ending does not always mean something went wrong. Sometimes two lives simply move in different directions. And when you stop measuring every ending as failure, grief becomes softer. You can appreciate what was given without demanding that it remain forever. You can say inwardly, thank you for what this taught me. Thank you for the love that was real. Thank you even for what the pain revealed about me. And now I release what no longer wishes to remain. This is not coldness. It is love without captivity. The same is true of the identity you have been carrying. Perhaps for years you have described yourself in certain ways. I am anxious. I am the one everyone depends on. I am the person who always gets hurt. I am someone who cannot trust. I am too old to begin again. I have always been this way. Listen carefully to the words I am. They are powerful because whatever follows them can become a home for consciousness. What if you became more careful about what you place after those words? Not by replacing pain with empty positive statements, but by leaving space for something larger. Instead of I am anxious, perhaps I am aware of anxiety moving through me. Instead of I am broken, perhaps I am meeting a wounded part of my experience. Instead of I am lost, perhaps I do not yet see the next direction. These small shifts matter. They separate your being from your temporary condition. The sky does not call itself a storm. The ocean does not define itself by one wave. Why should you define the whole of who you are by one season of your life? You are more spacious than the experience moving through you. And as you begin remembering this, you may notice another change. Silence becomes less frightening. Many people feel silence because silence allows hidden things to rise. The moment the television is turned off, the phone is put down, and no one is speaking, thoughts appear. Old sadness, unanswered questions, loneliness, regret. So you reach for noise. But if you remain with the silence gently, something interesting can happen. After the first layer of noise within you has spoken, there may be another kind of quiet beneath it. You begin hearing your breathing. You begin noticing sensations in your body. You begin realizing that this moment is not asking you to solve your entire life. Silence becomes less like emptiness and more like space. And within that space, you may sense what you have been searching for through other people, achievements, distractions, and constant thinking, presence. You may call it the source within you, not a voice necessarily, not a dramatic revelation. Sometimes it is simply the unmistakable feeling that you do not have to fight yourself anymore. From that place, love becomes less complicated. Love is no longer only an emotion you receive from someone else. It becomes a way of seeing. You look at yourself and remember that the frightened parts of you deserve tenderness. You look at another person and recognize that much of their behavior may also arise from fears you cannot see. This does not excuse cruelty. It simply prevents you from needing hatred in order to protect yourself. You can have boundaries without bitterness. You can walk away without wishing destruction upon the person behind you. You can say no without becoming unloving. You can forgive without returning. This is freedom. And perhaps one day you will encounter someone who once had the power to disturb you deeply. Maybe you will hear their name. Maybe you will see something that reminds you of them. And you will notice that your body no longer tightens in the same way. The memory is still there, but the poison is gone. You may smile quietly because you understand something you could not understand before. Healing did not require you to forget. It required you to stop becoming the wound every time you remembered it. This is how your life begins, rebuilding itself without force. The foundation changes. You are no longer building on the need to prove something. You are no longer building on resentment. You are no longer building on the fear that you are running out of time. You begin building on awareness, on compassion, on trust, on the willingness to be here. And when you live from that foundation, purpose also begins to look different. Purpose does not always arrive as one grand mission that explains your entire existence. Sometimes your purpose in this moment is simply to bring love where you once brought fear. Sometimes it is to listen to someone. Sometimes it is to forgive yourself. Sometimes it is to end a pattern that has moved through your family for years. Sometimes it is to become peaceful enough that you no longer pass your wounds to the people you love. Perhaps purpose is less about what you accomplish and more about the consciousness you bring to what you are already doing. You can wash dishes with resentment or presence. You can speak to a stranger with indifference or kindness. You can enter a difficult conversation determined to win or willing to understand. The activity may look ordinary. The consciousness is what transforms it. And slowly, life becomes sacred again. Not because everything becomes easy. You will still encounter uncertainty. People will still disappoint you. Your body will age. Things you love will change. There will be seasons of loss and seasons when you do not understand what life is doing. Spiritual awareness does not remove you from being human. It changes the place within you from which you meet your humanity. Instead of demanding that life never disturb you, you begin discovering a peace that can remain present even when life is uncertain. Like the deep ocean beneath the surface, waves, the surface may be restless, but deeper down, there is stillness. You are learning to live from that depth, and gratitude becomes natural there. Not the kind of gratitude that denies pain or insists that you should be happy about everything. A quieter gratitude. Gratitude for the breath you almost never notice, for the morning light entering the room, for the person who stayed, for the lesson hidden inside the relationship that did not, for the body that has carried you through every version of yourself, for the fact that no matter how many years you spent disconnected from your true nature, this moment still offers a doorway home. Perhaps you have been waiting for a dramatic sign that your new life has begun, but maybe it begins much more quietly. It begins the first morning you wake and do not immediately consult your past to decide who you are. It begins when you notice fear and choose not to let fear write the next sentence. It begins when you forgive one thing you thought you would carry forever. It begins when you stop chasing someone who has already chosen another direction. It begins when you sit in silence and discover that your own presence is not something you need to escape. It begins when you look at yourself without asking what needs to be fixed. And somewhere within you, perhaps you hear a softer question. What if I am not here to become worthy of life? What if I am here to become awake enough to receive the life that is already here? This is returning to your true self. You are not constructing that self. You are uncovering it, like sunlight behind clouds, like water beneath ice, like a seed that carried the pattern of the tree long before anyone could see its branches. The wisdom was not absent. It was covered, and now, little by little, you are remembering. You are remembering that peace does not require everyone to agree with you. You are remembering that forgiveness is freedom you give yourself. You are remembering that uncertainty does not mean you have been abandoned. You are remembering that an ending can create space. You are remembering that love does not require self-abandonment. You are remembering that the source you have been searching for may never have been separate from you. And from this remembrance, the final part of rebuilding becomes wonderfully simple. The question is no longer whether you understand these truths in a peaceful moment. The question becomes how you carry them into an ordinary Tuesday morning, into a difficult conversation, into loneliness, into uncertainty, into the moment an old wound returns and asks you to become your former self again. Because eventually, every spiritual insight asks to become a way of living. And perhaps that is where the deepest freedom begins. And so the question becomes very simple. How do you live this when the quiet moment ends? It is one thing to feel peaceful while listening to words about awareness, forgiveness, and letting go. It is another thing to remember them when you wake tomorrow and the familiar thoughts return. The unfinished conversation may still be there. The uncertainty may still be waiting. Someone may still misunderstand you. The future may still refuse to explain itself. But perhaps your new life does not begin when all of these things disappear. Perhaps it begins when they appear and you meet them differently. Tomorrow morning, before reaching for the story of your life, you might give yourself a few moments of stillness. Before remembering what went wrong yesterday, before wondering what someone thinks of you, before asking what must be solved, simply notice that you are here. Feel your breathing. Notice the quiet beneath the thoughts. You do not need to make the mind perfectly silent. You only need to remember that you are the awareness capable of noticing the mind. Then perhaps you can ask yourself one gentle question. What am I willing to stop carrying today? Maybe it is an argument you keep replaying. Maybe it is guilt about something you cannot change. Maybe it is the need for someone to approve of you. Maybe it is the belief that because yesterday was painful, today must become painful too. You do not have to release your entire past in one morning. Sometimes freedom happens one thought at a time. A gardener does not pull on a flower to make it open. The gardener creates the conditions in which opening can happen. In the same way, you can create conditions for peace through stillness, awareness, forgiveness, gratitude, and trust. You may notice resentment arising during the day. Instead of judging yourself for still feeling it, you can become aware of it. You can say quietly, I see what I am carrying. That awareness itself creates space. And perhaps forgiveness becomes a daily practice rather than one dramatic decision. You may forgive the person again when the memory returns. You may forgive yourself again when regret appears. Each time, you loosen your grip a little more. There may also be moments when fear asks you to control what comes next. When that happens, return to what is actually here. Ask yourself, is there something loving and honest for me to do in this moment? If there is, do that. Then allow the rest to belong to life. You do not need to solve next month while standing inside today. You do not need to understand the entire river before allowing yourself to move with the current. And when life gives you something beautiful, practice receiving it without immediately worrying about losing it. Notice the sunlight. Notice a quiet meal. Notice someone's kindness. Notice your own laughter when it unexpectedly returns. Gratitude brings you back to what fear continually overlooks. It does not deny difficulty. It simply reminds you that difficulty is not the whole picture. There is still beauty here. There is still love here. There is still life here. And when you forget all of this, as every human being sometimes will, simply return. You do not fail because you become afraid again. You do not lose your spiritual path because you become angry. You do not have to criticize yourself because an old wound suddenly hurts. Awareness is the return. You notice that you have wandered into an old story and you come back again and again, like returning your attention to the breath. Like returning home after walking a familiar road. Over time, something subtle begins to change. The thoughts that once controlled you may still visit, but they no longer own the house. Fear knocks, but you do not automatically hand it the keys. The past speaks, but you do not automatically call it your identity. Another person disapproves, but you do not immediately abandon yourself. Uncertainty appears, but you do not interpret it as evidence that life has forgotten you. This is what inner freedom can look like. It may not be dramatic. No one may applaud it. But inside you, there is more space. And in that space, you begin living closer to your true nature. You become less interested in proving and more interested in being. Less interested in winning every argument and more interested in protecting the quality of your consciousness. Less interested in controlling people and more interested in loving without possession. Less interested in asking life, why are you doing this to me? And more willing to ask, what is this moment showing me about what I still carry? Then even difficult seasons can become teachers. A loss can teach you what cannot be possessed. A disappointment can reveal an attachment. A conflict can show you where an old wound still wants compassion. Solitude can teach you how to remain with yourself. Aging can remind you that every form changes, while the awareness witnessing those changes carries a strange sense of continuity. And uncertainty can invite you into trust. Perhaps this is what it means to rebuild your life spiritually. You do not tear everything down and become someone else. You remove what was never truly you. The fear that told you love had to be earned. The guilt that told you one mistake could define an entire lifetime. The resentment that kept you emotionally tied to someone who hurt you. The comparison that convinced you your season was wrong because someone else was blooming. The need for control that made you believe peace must wait until the future became predictable. Layer by layer, these things become lighter. And underneath them, you find something surprisingly familiar. You, not the identity you spent years defending. Not the person other people expected you to be. Not the frightened voice trying to predict every outcome. Something quieter. Something that feels less like becoming and more like remembering. Perhaps that is why awakening can sometimes feel like coming home. The home was never destroyed. You simply wandered far enough into thought that you forgot where it was. The source did not disappear because you were afraid. Love did not disappear because someone rejected you. Your worth did not disappear because you failed. Peace did not disappear because life became difficult. These things may have been covered by noise, pain, and years of identification with a story, but covered is not the same as gone. So when you hear the words, wake up and rebuild your life, perhaps you can hear them differently now. Wake up from the belief that your past is your identity. Wake up from the belief that another person holds the key to your peace. Wake up from the belief that you must control tomorrow before you can appreciate today. And rebuild, not from fear, but from awareness. Not from resentment, but from forgiveness. Not from the need to prove yourself, but from the quiet recognition that your deepest worth was never waiting to be earned. Let your life become an expression of that remembrance. When you speak, bring awareness. When you listen, bring presence. When you make a mistake, bring compassion. When someone hurts you, Bring discernment without surrendering yourself to hatred. When something ends, grieve it, honor it, and allow the season to change. When something beautiful arrives, receive it. And when you do not know what comes next, remember that you have lived through many moments you once thought you could not face. You are here, breathing, aware, capable of choosing again. Maybe this moment is enough for a beginning. You do not need to wait for Monday, a new year, a perfect opportunity, an apology, or some dramatic spiritual sign. You can begin in the quietest possible way. You can release one thought, forgive one memory, take one conscious breath, offer gratitude for one ordinary thing, choose love once where fear would normally speak, and then do it again when life gives you another opportunity. There is no finish line to this. There is only a deepening relationship with the presence within you. And perhaps one day you will look back at the person who felt lost, exhausted, frightened, and disconnected, and you will not judge that person. You will feel tenderness. You will understand that they were never truly lost. They were searching outside themselves for a home that had remained quietly within them all along. And perhaps you will whisper inwardly, "Thank you. Thank you to the version of you who survived what they did not understand. Thank you to the mistakes that eventually became wisdom. Thank you to the endings that created space. Thank you to the silence that taught you to listen. Thank you to the life that kept inviting you home." Then allow yourself to become quiet for a moment. There is nothing you need to prove here, nothing you need to force, nothing you need to become before you are worthy of peace. You can simply be here. And perhaps beneath everything you have heard, you recognize something that does not feel entirely new. Maybe you have known it before. Maybe you knew it as a child before the world gave you so many identities to carry. Maybe you have touched it in silence, in nature, in love, in moments when the mind finally stopped trying to control everything. The wisdom was already within you. You simply forgot. And now you are remembering. If something in this journey spoke to you, you are welcome to share in the comments what you feel ready to release as you begin again. And if these quiet spiritual conversations help you return to yourself, you can subscribe and continue walking with us. Until we meet again, remember this: you do not have to rebuild your life by becoming someone new. Release what is no longer yours to carry. Return to love. Return to stillness. Return to the source within you, and allow the life that has always been waiting beneath the fear to gently reveal itself. You are not beginning from nothing. You are beginning from remembrance.